Hello, this is a quick overview of a couple of comments about problem number 1 as it was created. This is the 2015 AP Stats exam, and it looks like a straightforward problem comparing two box plots. In the directions, it does say write a few sentences. It's to compare the distributions, and of course the context would be yearly salaries at two corporations. So generally speaking, students were supposed to comment about shapes, center, spread, and outliers, or as some teachers like to teach it, it's the SOX acronym. However, in this particular rubric, shape is not something that can be described fully with box plots, so that was not graded. Any comments about shape were disregarded. On the other hand, outliers definitely would need to be talked about, since in Corporation A there are two of them. The centers would also be something expected for students, and then the spread. And then context, of course, is always expected, so we will put that in there as well. So the 4 points that students needed to bring out in question A, part A, were those 4 that I've checked there. In part B, they were supposed to base an answer on the box plots, give one reason why you might choose to accept the job at Corporation A. And it turns out the word you is going to be very important for the context part. It turns out in the rubric, not only do they have to have a statistical answer, let me just scroll ahead to the rubric. For part B, they had to have not only a relevant statistical measure, as it says in the rubric, a relevant statistical measure, but also they have to provide why that measure is relevant, an explanation of why that measure is relevant. That's really two separate things that were scored. Same thing in part 3. There had to be a relevant statistical measure, but also an explanation of why that measurement is relevant. And relevant is going to turn out to mean they need to talk about earning money, earning a higher salary, or more money. That's what has to be brought out in the explanation. So if we scroll down to student E, I'd just like to highlight a couple things. Student E, in their explanation of the comparison, they did in fact write sentences. Now they did talk about shape, so we are just going to disregard this completely because we can't tell fully what the shape is. And then for outliers, they did say there's 2 in A and there's none in B, so they get credit for outliers. They get credit for comparing the centers, and they get credit for comparing the spreads. Where is the context? Well, you might think that when they say Corporation A, that's context. It's really not, though. Corporation A is just really a label for the two box plots. Those are really just labels. So when they talk about Corporation A and Corporation B, that's really not context. They need to talk about what the data is, which is salary. So where in here do they talk about salary or money? Turns out right there. That is the place where they earn credit for context, because they do show that it's not just 51, it's $51,000 in this case. Now, they of course didn't say 1,000, so because I guess the units were given in thousands, that was overlooked on that particular part. In part B then, they're supposed to give a good relevant statistical reason, so they said they would choose, and they made a choice. They choose Corporation A because it has the highest salary. They're talking about the maximum, so they get credit for a relevant statistical characteristic, the maximum salary. However, they did not really go that deeper part about an explanation of why that's relevant. Why is it relevant? Because you can make the maximum salary because I would earn more money. At least that's possible. So earning more money is the part that they left out. Now that may seem to be a fairly picky thing, but nonetheless, that is what the rubric said. In part B, they said, again, the lowest salary is higher. They're talking about the minimum, so it has a higher minimum. And if it has a higher minimum, then again, I would have a chance to earn more money, or not earn less money, I guess would be another way to say that. Not earn the least amount of money possible earned. But they did not talk about earning more money. So therefore, in both of these parts, they did not get it. So they got the statistical explanation for both of them, but they did not get the relevancy explanation. So because they got 2 out of 4, that was considered a partial. So overall, for this student, student E, they got essentially correct for the first part. They got partially correct for the second part. And so that was scored as a 3. If we look at student F, and you look at their comparisons, at first glance, it looks like they're comparing center, they're comparing spread, and again, we don't really count any sort of shape, and they do have money, so they've got context. But for one thing, they did not compare the, or they didn't talk about outliers, so outliers is missing. So there's no talk about outliers. And then the other thing that really dooms them is they did not really write sentences comparing. There's no comparative language of greater than, less than, more, that sort of thing. And so they did not really do any sort of comparison. So really they did not get credit for comparing centers. They did not get credit for comparing spreads. They did not get credit for comparing outliers. The only thing they did was they got credit for context. And because that's only one part out of 4, they got an incomplete, or an incorrect, I should say. In part B, they're talking about Corporation A. They made a choice. They said there's a possibility of earning over $60,000. So the possibility of earning, that is the statistical maximum. And they said they're going to earn money. That gets credit for the relevant statistical component, and why that's important is because you could earn over $60,000. Part B is really just parallel. They said you're guaranteed to make, that's talking about the maximum, that's the relevant statistical component, and then they did say earning $40,000. So they equated that to what would make that relevant to them personally. So they got credit for all 4 parts. So they got an E overall score for student F. They got an incomplete on part A, and they got a essentially correct on part B, and that turns out then to be a score of 2, which is considered minimal. Actually, no, 2 is considered developing. And that would be relevant to this student.